I'm John Krull. On today's No Limits, we're going to talk about dyslexia. We're going to explore what dyslexia is and how many people are affected by it. We're going to talk about learning strategies to deal with dyslexia and other ways to put young people and others on the path to success. My guests are Nancy Perry and Cheryl Clemens, both of Decoding Dyslexia Indiana, and both certified in Orton Gillingham reading instruction. We're also joined by Joshua Clemens, who's Cheryl's son and is dyslexic himself. Please join the conversation. Call 866-476-3881. Email is nolimits@wfyi.org. Facebook is nolimits.wfyi. Twitter is WFYI. Now, this news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Anger is mounting over security checkpoint delays as millions of people prepare to travel out of town for the long holiday weekend. Today, a top executive with American Airlines testified before Congress that airport screening delays at the nation's airports have caused more than 70,000 American Airlines passengers to miss their flights. And Kara Filipovich says they were not alone.
This year alone, over 40,000 checked bags were delayed in TSA screening and did not travel on their scheduled flight.
Her testimony to a U.S. congressional subcommittee came a day after the head of the Transportation Security Administration testified about how his agency is trying to cut down the lengthy wait times at checkpoints that have caused widespread disruptions this spring. After weeks of being called the de facto nominee when his rivals dropped out of the Republican presidential race, Donald Trump will formally be announced the GOP nominee at this July's convention. NPR's Asma Khalid reports that an Associated Press count finds Trump has secured enough delegates required to secure the nomination.
Trump now has 1,238 delegates, according to a tally from the Associated Press. That's one more than the 1,237 magic number a Republican needs for the GOP presidential nomination. Trump got to this point because 29 unbound Republican delegates told the AP they plan to support the business mogul at the RNC convention. Those delegates come from a mix of states, and this suggests Republicans are beginning to unite behind Trump as their candidate. Trump was widely expected to reach the delegate threshold after primaries on June 7th, but he got there sooner than expected. He'll become the official nominee at the Republican convention in Cleveland this summer. Asma Khalid, NPR News.
Europol Director Rob Wainwright says Europe is facing the most serious security threat in decades from its own citizens who've been radicalized. Terry Schultz reports the head of Europe's police agency estimates more than 1,500 foreign fighters are back in Europe after fighting with ISIS and other extremist groups.
Europol Chief Rob Wainwright says at least 5,000 European citizens have become foreign fighters in Syria or Iraq. Wainwright says governments must have a plan to deal with those who return, which he estimates to be a third of them so far. Some of those are in prison, some in rehabilitation, but some, Wainwright warns, have violent intentions toward their home countries, such as the Belgian and French citizens who staged the Brussels and Paris attacks.
And there are others, potentially, that could pose an equal danger. And that's a serious terrorist threat, the most serious that we've seen in a generation in Europe.
Wainwright says despite the threat, European governments are still only sharing about half the data they could be to fight terrorism. For NPR News, I'm Terry Schultz in Brussels.
The Dow is off 41 points at 17,810. This is NPR News.
Welcome to No Limits. I am John Krull, director of Franklin College's Pulliam School of Journalism, publisher of thestatehouseFile.com, and your host. We're going to be talking today about dyslexia. If you'd like to join the conversation, please give us a buzz at 866-476-3881. You can send us an email at nolimits@wfyi.org. Find us on Facebook at nolimitswfyi or on Twitter at WFYI. And I should say that this program, like many we have done, is part of American Graduate. That is a shared initiative with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and many public broadcasting stations, including WFYI. It is designed to leverage the power of public broadcasting and public communication to help put young people on the path to graduation and successful lives. My guests today are Nancy Perry and Cheryl Clemens, both of Decoding Dyslexia Indiana, and Joshua Clemens, who is Cheryl's son. He's a dyslexic student from Lutheran High School. I'm pretty sure that's not the way they really identify you, though, Joshua.
It's
more
usually just Lou High.
Lou High,
Yeah.
Lou High. Well, welcome to all of you, and it probably should be student with dyslexia rather than dyslexic student. It shouldn't define you in that fashion. I will try to make sure that we do that. Well, I want to get started here. As I explained before we went on the air, I don't like to make the assumption that people know things. I do this drill when I'm teaching where I will say to my students, okay, if anything I've just said you don't understand, look down at the floor now, as a way of not forcing them to put the hands up or whatever. Can't do that over the radio because I can't see the hands, but let's start by talking about what dyslexia is. And I'll start with Nancy on that one.
Thank you. Dyslexia is a neurobiological learning difference that affects how a student, how a person processes the language that they have. The International Dyslexia Association, which is a research body that we look to greatly, says that it is a specific learning disability, and that is how we oftentimes refer to it in school, though specifically it is defined as dyslexia. And it's neurological in origin. It's characterized with difficulty with accurate or fluent word recognition, and then poor spelling, decoding, written expression. Those tend to be the key factors that you see.
Yeah, one of the ways I've always looked at it is that it for whatever reason, some of the letters or the symbols, and we tend to forget that language, at least written language, is a series of symbols that we have all agreed upon have meaning. That P makes this sound or whatever. That people scramble, the brain kind of scrambles those symbols. Is that the case, Cheryl?
I think one thing we have to look at is it's not low IQ. So some people often think, it's low IQ. So it's represented by people.
It's actually the opposite.
Exactly. People like Steve Jobs and Charles Schwab are known dyslexics. But really it's the way the brain processes information. And typically the processing of language is on the left side of the brain. And through functional MRI images, they have seen that people with dyslexia, the MRI doesn't light up in the same way as good readers, so they rely heavily towards the Broca's region of the brain. So I wouldn't say that the letters get mixed up in there. It just takes a different route of processing.
Joshua, how long have you known you were dyslexic?
Since about third grade.
Third grade?
Yeah.
Okay, walk me through the process, if you can remember. I know it's been a few years, and I should say Joshua is far from third grade.
Yeah.
he's a rather robust young man. Walk me through, because the friends and students I have had who have had dyslexia speak of the frustration that they experienced before they were diagnosed. So if you could, take me through, did you start school in kindergarten or did you do
I started school in kindergarten.
Okay, take me through what kindergarten, first and second grade were like, where you're really building those building blocks.
Okay, so in kindergarten I was having trouble reading. I couldn't read. By second grade it became to the point where the teacher said that I could read, but I just refused not to. I was not trying hard enough.
And how did you come to discover that you were dyslexic?
I had a tutor who then recommended having outside testing, and then once I had the outside testing, that's how I figured out that I was dyslexic.
Okay, and Nancy or Cheryl, what sort of testing do you do to identify dyslexia? What form does that take? Either one of you. Cheryl, you're making eye contact, and Nancy's looking at you, so I'm assuming...
Okay. Well, you do a full educational evaluation through
Yeah, but walk me through what that looks like, what sort of things you test or look for.
Okay, so I should add this. So when Joshua was in first grade, it was towards the end of first grade that his teacher said to me, I want you to know that anytime Joshua has to read, he cries.
Oh.
And so for me, that was a warning.
Yeah.
So But what happened between first and second then was there's an indication that he can do this. He just isn't willing to, or he doesn't want to. Because when you're looking around the room, it doesn't appear that you're focused on what you're doing. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And so we did outside testing. Many times the school will do testing, but they'll often wait until a child is about 2+ years behind before they do testing. We're fortunate we could afford the outside testing, and they do a complete IQ testing because they want to show that it isn't low cognitive ability. And then rapid naming, there's probably 10 different tests that go into the actual testing to say, this looks like dyslexia.
And, Joshua, the fact that obviously you were having an emotional reaction every time you were asked to read in the first grade gets to one of the costs of not being able to diagnose this quickly enough, and that is, it sounds like there were some blows to your self-esteem at that point. So, Nancy, what are some of the other costs that come with not identifying dyslexia and coming up with a learning plan for it quickly?
Well, when I have tutored students, oftentimes these students will come into tutoring with me and they will say, they feel like they're dumb. That's what they're internalizing, that there's this big mysterious code that everybody knows, and somehow there's this secret that they've not been let in on. And then, so as a tutor, we do a lot to change that voice, change that internal message. So that they can see their gifts and talents. And unfortunately, they miss their gifts and talents if they listen to that voice too much. And then the world around misses that. And you might end up with a student who's a freshman who's never been identified, and they've always been labeled, but not appropriately. They've been labeled as that child who doesn't want to try, who's lazy, who doesn't give it his or her all. And so that is a great cost. We often then see these children, it's not uncommon to drop out. Mm-hmm. And then, there's that school to prison pipeline.
Yeah, their options are limited after that point. And Cheryl alluded to this, and we sort of alluded in conversation, but we should say intelligence, as we traditionally understand it, we now also have a much more sophisticated understanding of what intelligence is than we did a few years ago. But as we traditionally understand it, most often isn't the problem here either. In fact, most dyslexic people with dyslexia, in fact, have at least average and can have, in fact, phenomenally high traditional IQs. Mm-hmm. We are talking about dyslexia here on No Limits. If you would like to join the conversation, you can send us an email at nolimits@wfyi.org. Find us on Facebook at No Limits WFYI, on Twitter at WFYI, or you can do what a listener named Barbara has done and give us a call at 866-476-3881. Barbara, welcome to the program.
Thank you for taking my call.
Certainly. What's on your mind?
I'm 75 years old. I'm a retired teacher. I taught at MacArthur Elementary for 35 years. And when I was in 3rd and 4th grade, I was called dumb and dutchy. And by the time I got to 8th grade, I was, in a shell. And Miss Brumfield told me I learned differently. She said, oh, here, let's try this, let's try that. And so it changed my life, and I'm also an aerospace specialist now, all because of Miss Brumfield saying, oh, you learn differently. And when I was a teacher, this one child was aggressive, but he was put in my room, and the first day of school, I wrote everything on the board backwards because I'm also reverse vision. And he stood up and yelled, I'm getting A's, because I'd written, if you can read, just stand up and say you have A's.
Well, thank you for calling in and sharing your story, Barbara. I really appreciate it.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. So moments like that, though, are critical here. The intervention of a teacher, just that conversation with a teacher to Cheryl about Joshua is important. Joshua, I'm going to add, and I don't want to push you past your comfort zone because, we try to have a friendly atmosphere here, but you are talking to thousands of strangers over the radio, okay? So I want to be sensitive to that. But how, during that time, when you were struggling, because I presume now you're an intelligent and capable young man and all of that sort of stuff. It sounds like, though, you weren't feeling that way when you were in first grade. What did that feel like going to school day after day?
I dreaded it every single day.
You dread, and what did you try talking with your parents or with your teachers or anyone about it, or was it something that you were just so embarrassed?
I think I was mostly embarrassed. It's kind of hard to remember because I've tried to block it out of my mind.
It was that painful that you want to block it out?
Some of it, yeah.
And, in terms of when you were told then after the diagnosis, okay, this is, you're not dumb. In effect, Barbara's story here. You just learn differently than other people. How did that feel?
I felt like a sigh of relief because I was able to get the right help to be, so like I couldn't read before. And in the testing, the person who did it told me to get Orton-Gillingham. And with the Orton-Gillingham, I went 2 reading levels up in 7 months of tutoring. So being able to finally feel like I'm reading more was a huge sigh of relief.
What is Orton-Gillingham?
It's a multisensory, systematic, explicit phonetic approach to learning to read. And if you go back clear to the reading panel, it's actually recommended that we all learn in this way.
I'm going to, not to be disrespectful, but I'm going to ask you to break that out of education speak into the way real people talk. Okay. So when you say that, what is
so
it?
multisensory,
Give me an
there's 3
example.
pathways. So we use the hearing, the vision, and the auditory, the visual, and the kinesthetic. So when we introduce, for example, let's say a vowel team of OA, we do all 3 at the same time. OA says O, OA says O, using
All three pathways.
Because
Because oftentimes a student who is dyslexic, because we had mentioned the pathway to retain information, is they're wired differently. So that pathway is a little more cumbersome and they need more repetition. So if we can hit with all 3 pathways at the same time, we run a big chance.
We are talking about dyslexia here on No Limits. My guests are Nancy Perry and Cheryl Clemens, both of Decoding Dyslexia Indiana, and Joshua Clemens, who's Cheryl's son. He's a student with dyslexia from Lutheran High School. If you'd like to join the conversation, give us a buzz at 866-476-3881. Please stay with us.
Good afternoon. It's 19 minutes past 1 o'clock. You're listening to No Limits on 90.1 WFYI Public Radio and WFYI.org, made possible by your membership and by Terry Lee Honda, allowing visitors to experience Hondas at its facility in Avon and online. Visitors can build their own Hondas, schedule appointments, and get quotes. More at TerryLeeHonda.com, and by Ice Miller LLP, proudly joining the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and celebrating the 100th running of the Indianapolis 500-mile race. For more than 70 years, Ice Miller has assisted the Speedway with its legal needs. More information is at IceMiller.com. Your support makes a difference all year round. Become a monthly supporter of 90.1 WFYI Public Radio by becoming a sustaining member at WFYI.org/give. And thank you. You can sign up for No Limits email topic alerts at WFYI.org/no limits.
Welcome back to No Limits. I am John Krull, director of Franklin College's Pulliam School of Journalism, publisher of theStateHouseFile.com, and your host. We're talking about dyslexia today. It's part of our ongoing American graduate conversation we do in partnership with Corporation for Public Broadcasting. It's designed to leverage the power of public television radio stations to help put people, young people in particular, on the path to graduation and success in life. My guests are Nancy Perry and Cheryl Clemens, both of Decoding Dyslexia Indiana, and Joshua Clemens, who's Cheryl's son. He is a student with dyslexia from Lutheran High School. We still have not talked about how many people are affected by this. Presumably Joshua is not the only person in the world who's ever had to deal with this. So could you give me, and I'll start with Cheryl on this one, some idea of the numbers of people who are involved?
Yes, according to the NIH and the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity, dyslexia affects 1 out of 5 children. In my family, it affects 3 of my 4 children.
Is it hereditary?
Runs through families.
So it runs through family. We think that there's probably something genetic, some part of the coding that goes along. So 1 in 5, 20%, we're doing the conversion here and all of that. How many of those folks are actually identified along the way? Nancy, I'll throw that one your way.
They estimate perhaps only 1/3 of dyslexic students are ever identified, and oftentimes they are identified late. 3rd grade, 8th grade, those tend to be some of the big years for identification.
Go ahead.
And of course, early identification is what is key, because if you can identify early and intervene appropriately, 95% of reading failure or reading difficulties is preventable. And so we should, in my opinion, be identifying when we do those kindergarten roundups, when we do those preschool programs. That is a perfect time to identify and intervene so that these children can succeed along with their grade level peers and never experience that gap and frustration.
So there, can I,
Go ahead.
So there's
please.
a Joe Torgeson study that says that if you bring a child up to grade level, by the end of 2nd grade, he will continue on with his peers. However, if that intervention doesn't occur before the end of 2nd grade, comprehension, you can bring that up to grade level, but your fluency takes a big hit. And so that can result in a lifelong disability.
And all of the other psychological and emotional things that go along with that. Is there a point of no return on this? Is there a point where if we don't catch it, there's not much that can be done about it?
I know of tutors who tutor people in their 70s. So if you're using multisensory systematic explicit phonics, it works.
Yes, one of my friends tutors, and he is tutoring somebody in their late 80s, or late 70s, early 80s. So I'm an optimist, and I don't feel it's ever too late.
So we need to identify these young people earlier. What are the telltale signs, the things that and presumably this shouldn't all fall to teachers or educate, as parents, even siblings, we can look to see if we can identify what's going on. What are the telltale signs that signal we might be dealing with dyslexia? Cheryl.
So one of the first signs isn't so much what they're doing, but it's what they're not doing. So very early on, they're usually slow to begin speaking, not significantly so, but a little bit. And a lot of times if they're boys, we tend to think, oh, well, he's a boy, so, he's just speaking a little bit later. Then as they approach where you think that they should be able to learn the alphabet, they're not learning the letters, names, followed by then letter sounds. So my youngest of 3 that are dyslexic, my youngest son, he was putting together circuits, so like open circuits, closed circuits, parallel circuits, electrical circuits at the age of 4, but he could not learn the letter names of the alphabet. So being that he was the 3rd child, I recognized it was dyslexia.
Recognize the signs. And when we do intervene, this, what steps does that take?
So we took immediately when I finally realized that, well, if you have one sibling who's diagnosed with SLD, then 50% of the other siblings are at risk of also having that. Then seeing that, we started Orton Gillingham the year before he started kindergarten. So he has really not struggled to read. In fact, he's probably reading more in the 70-some percentile, according to his reading scores. But now writing and spelling, those still are challenges.
Tricky. We are talking about dyslexia here on No Limits. If you would like to join the conversation, please send us an email at nolimits@wfyi.org. You can find us on Facebook at No Limits WFYI, on Twitter at WFYI, or you can do what a listener named William has done and give us a call at 866-476-3881. William, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you so much.
Certainly. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm a dyslexic, and you were just talking about how it runs in the family, and my son is also dyslexic. And one thing that's been a frustration is that the school system, the testing culture, it likes to treat every student the same. I mean, we have an IEP and we have accommodations, but it's like the school system through the testing culture really wants every student to perform exactly the same with regard to reading, and it's I think there needs to be a big shift from the testing culture to accommodate the one in five dyslexic students that are going through the school system.
Thanks very much for the call and for sharing your story, William.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. So how would we change the school system and the testing culture so that it would be both more beneficial to students with dyslexia and presumably, more efficient and productive? Nancy, I'll start with you on that one.
I think one key change would be to train teachers. So many teachers, as I've participated in training with other trainers, there's this aha moment, and they can just see a sea of students who have been in their class before, thinking, that's what was going on, and now I know how I could have identified and helped. So teacher training is important because, 2/3 of those dyslexic students will never be identified through the IEP process. So that's a big thing.
We probably ought to break down what IEP is.
Yes, yes, thank you.
Education plan. Yeah.
We live in this world all the time. We forget.
And I actually let it go by the first time and realized, because I live in that world too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good question. An IEP is an individualized education plan. So a team, a case conference team has gotten together, and that usually includes a school psychologist, school speech pathologist, a teacher, and then they look at all of these data points for a student, and then they come up with, they identify needs drive goals, goals drive services. So if, for example, my two sons who are dyslexic, they struggle in written expression. And so we had a goal of being able to write a 5-paragraph essay because we have the end of course assessments in high school that will determine their graduation. And so we needed, that need drove a goal, and that goal drove a service. And so, or the services provided. And so that is what the IEP process ideally is being really specific with what that individual student need is. Unfortunately, sometimes we hide kids under an umbrella, and we don't always, the umbrella term of specific learning disability, and we don't always get to that need specifically because the SLD category is a very broad category and sometimes can miss the mark with a dyslexic student specifically.
I've gotten an email question from a listener named Sammy, and if you would like to reach out to us by email, you can find us at nolimits@wfyi.org. Sammy says, what should I do if I suspect my child is dyslexic? Where can I go for information or resources? And how early can I get my child tested? Cheryl?
I'd like to say if you have the resources, you can seek outside testing. You can talk to your school's principal and his teacher to try to encourage them to get testing. I would start developing the data to support why you think that he needs testing. So therefore, if there's Dibble's data or Ames Web data around reading that specifically show that there's a gap in where he's at, it's sometimes a challenge to get that testing.
I've also gotten an email that might be on point here from a listener named Adam, who says, hello, so great you are talking about dyslexia on your show. Thanks for educating the public and spreading awareness. Can you please let your listeners know if they want further information, teacher training, or individual multisensory instruction services to please visit the Dyslexia Institute of Indiana website at www.DIIN. I didn't add an extra I in there. www.DIIN.org. And then he also says, please call if you have questions. Are there other resources out there,
Yes.
places people can go, URLs where they can get information?
DII is certainly a place that we send parents and teachers as well. There's the International Dyslexia Association and the Indiana branch of the IDA. They offer teacher training in the summer in structured literacy, Orton Gillingham approach. And then we also refer people to the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity. There is a school in Indianapolis known as Fortune Academy, and they also do some screenings as well, and they are good about publicizing when those things happen.
We also refer families to the Scottish Rite.
Yes.
You can have tutoring, multisensory systematic explicit phonetic intervention through the Scottish Rite, and it's free.
It is.
Which is a great asset to the community. And the M.A. Rooney Foundation is a foundation that's dedicated to training teachers in K through 2 in this approach from a classroom perspective, and so they are training large groups of teachers around Indiana.
Joshua, I'm going to ask a question. What do you ever think about what your life would be like if this hadn't been spotted? Or is that a place you try not to go?
I try not to go there because it probably wouldn't be good. I would probably, judging by other people who don't get testing, probably, I'd probably be failing instead of excelling. I may have dropped out based on other people's who haven't been.
Who have struggled with this. We've gotten an email from our friend Travis DiNicola, who's the executive director of Indy Reads and the host of WFYI's The Art of the Matter, and has been a guest on this show several times. So glad you are having this great conversation today. Please note that there are many adults who are dyslexic who never receive help as students and often don't even know they are dyslexic. We estimate that almost half of the 1,350 adults Indy Reads works with every year have some form of dyslexia, which makes it very difficult for them to learn to read as adults, which gets to, I think, the point you were making about early intervention being the key. If it's not spotted, the costs just continue to mount, right, Nancy?
Yes.
And then we've gotten another email from a listener named Megan with a slightly different perspective. And again, if you want to reach out to us by email, you can find us at nolimits@wfyi.org. Megan says, while I appreciate all the efforts made to help students with dyslexia and other learning disabilities, I continue to be bothered by the fact that it is so important for all students to perform the same in specific areas of study. As someone who experienced the hardships of having a learning disability, I never understood why so much effort was put into making me a better mathematician when I never saw other students being forced to be better artists. Is there truth to that observation, would you say, Cheryl?
maybe there is some truth. You need to have a certain level of math skill to be able to get through life, whereas I'm not sure you need that level for art. But it definitely, when it comes to like algebra ECAs and some of the higher level math, I kind of agree with her that.
Now, does presumably because numbers are symbols as well, at least the written numerals and all of that. Does dyslexia affect that, or or do we call that dysnumeric or whatever?
There is what's called dyscalculia, but dyslexics often have trouble with rote memorization of math facts. So they may understand higher level math skills, but if I asked what's 7 times 8, there might be a struggle. So we teach them in a different way to do that.
We are talking about dyslexia here on No Limits. If you'd like to join the conversation, please give us a buzz at 866-476-3881. Sue, welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you for taking my call.
Certainly.
My wife is 54, and she's dyslexic, and she was never treated in school. They dumped her into special ed in junior high school and just called her a dummy. But she has succeeded in that she is an aircraft inspector. But reading is still hard for her, and she'd like to read for pleasure. And I just wonder, is it reasonable to hope that we could do something now to help her with that?
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks very much for the call. We'll see if we can get you an answer, Sue. Yeah, Cheryl, please step in. No, that's okay. Don't apologize. You were trying to help.
Sorry.
You're trying to
Absolutely. You need to find somebody who's trained in Orton Gillingham, which is a multisensory systematic explicit phonetic approach. DII tutors adults. I think Scottish Rite's only children, but there are also private tutors that also
and if you
tutor.
reach out to Decoding Dyslexia Indiana and let us know what part of the state you're in, we do know of private tutoring.
How do if people want to reach out to you, how do they go about doing that?
You can reach out to us. The best way is through our Facebook page and through Twitter. We're very active on both of those platforms.
Okay. And do you have a URL at all? Just an email? Any place where they can find you traditionally?
We do. I do not have that committed to memory, but I will get out our business card and let you know.
We are coming up on a break, so we will get that. Promise we will get that to you, Sue, after the break. And speaking of that, we've gotten an email from a listener named Nicole, who says, your listeners might be interested to hear that a not-for-profit in Broad Ripple offers educational advocacy and consultation for families dealing with learning disabilities. Its name is Disability Legal Services of Indiana. Are you familiar with that group, the two of you? Well, in terms of all of this, and I guess real quickly, are there differences between the way we have to teach children and adults in dealing with dyslexia? You're shaking your head, Cheryl. Is it really the same approach at any age?
I would say it's the same approach. I wouldn't start with, like the word cat. I'd probably teach a syllable pattern first and then...
Yes, you would match what... you would start in a more complicated morphology, so you might start with a root or a syllable pattern, yes.
And you always do an evaluation to see exactly where your student is at. So you're kind of looking at the gaps and what they have.
We are talking about dyslexia here on No Limits. My guests are Nancy Perry and Cheryl Clemens from Decoding Dyslexia and Cheryl's son, Joshua. I'm John Krull. Please stay with us.
Listen up. WFYI's On Air to Indie Speaker Series is proud to present Marsha Bemko, executive producer of Antiques Roadshow, Friday, July 8th at the Indiana Repertory Theater. Hear firsthand what it takes to produce Antiques Roadshow on the eve of its stop in Indianapolis. Tickets are available at WFYI.org/events. Listen up. Presented by WFYI and the Indianapolis Foundation, an affiliate of CICF.
To the classic stages of grief, namely denial, anger, depression, and bargaining, experts have added panic, weeping, and praying that somehow the latest national polls are just Nate Silver's idea of a prank. I'm Peter Sagal. This week we talked to the head of FEMA for tips on surviving any disaster, natural, man-made, or really, really classy. Join us for Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, the news quiz from NPR.
Listen in this weekend on 90.1.
Welcome to No Limits. I am John Krull, Director of Franklin College's Pulliam School of Journalism, publisher of theStateHouseFile.com, and your host. Today on No Limits, we're continuing our conversation about education as part of the American Graduate Series, which attempts to leverage the power of public broadcasting to help set people on the paths to graduation and successful lives. Today, we're talking about dyslexia. My guests are Nancy Perry and Cheryl Clemens, both of Decoding Dyslexia Indiana, and Joshua Clemens, who's Cheryl's son. He's a student with dyslexia from Lutheran High School. Before we went to the break, a listener named Sue called in and asked if there were places she could go for help and all of that. We got the Facebook and Twitter information for Decoding Dyslexia, but you also can go to you can send an email to decodingdyslexiaindiana@gmail.com. It looks like there's also a website, decodingdyslexiain.wix.com. So we hope that information is useful. We'll try to get that up on our Facebook page as well so that anyone who needs it can find it. Again, we are talking about dyslexia. If you'd like to join the conversation, please give us a buzz at 866-476-3881. Jennifer, welcome to the program.
Hi, yes. I wanted to thank Josh for telling his story. I have a 9-year-old who's basically going through the same thing, but I wanted to go back to the way that the schools diagnose, or the way that they handle once the child is diagnosed, the way that they will not say the word dyslexia. They will not give specifics on exactly how to help the child. They're just all put under this general disability and learning. And is there anything currently going on within the state? I know the IEP or the ISEP and that kind of things have been voted out, but are there any current things happening that the panel knows of that is addressing the fact that these students are just lumped instead of really actually helped for their specific learning disability, not just given the term specific? And then the last question I wanted to put forward was, with my 9-year-old, he really wants to know other students who have his specific learning style, and he's not allowed to know that necessarily because of privacy. And I know there is a camp that goes on during the summer, so we're looking into that for him. But is there any way that the schools can address allowing these children to know each other, or do you know anything about that?
Thanks very much for the call and the questions, Jennifer. I'll throw that one to Nancy first.
As far as addressing and calling dyslexia specifically by name, the federal government, through the Office of Education, did issue a guidance letter in October that says schools, you can say the word dyslexia and should. And so there is that federal guidance letter.
So get a copy of that letter and take it with you to your IEP meeting.
Another guidance letter to have on hand is the guidance letter that says schools, please don't delay educational testing because you are telling a parent they are in an RTI process, because early identification is key and the RTI process is ongoing. So we want to get at this right away and not delay. So those two guidance letters, say dyslexia and don't delay, are two important ones to have on hand. As far as support groups,
I would recommend, we have a closed group of parents on Facebook that you can ask to be included in as long as you have children with dyslexia. And it's a good opportunity to meet other parents. And you might find also that parents from your school are already in that group. There's over 300. I think there's close to 400 parents from all over Indiana in that group. But we also sometimes then meet because you get to know each other in that way.
Gotten an email from a listener named John, and if you'd like to reach out to us by email, you can find us at nolimits@wfyi.org. John says, hello, I am a school psychologist, and I wanted to comment on your dyslexia program or specific learning disability, as we refer to it in schools. I take issue with the Orton-Gillingham method being promoted, as this has never been proven to be effective in research studies. This is not a method or intervention that shows positive gains in peer-reviewed research journals. There are many methods that can be effective and are typically in use during the RTI process in schools, response to intervention, he says. Thank you for your time. I just want parents to be educated and not be given false hope in this program. Obviously, the two of you are believers in Orton-Gillingham. I'll give you a chance to respond. Who would like to go first, Nancy?
It's our understanding that the DOE, for the U.S. DOE, is working on a toolkit to be used by schools, which will include programs that use, and again, we'll use the words multisensory, systematic, explicit, phonetic approach. That includes things like Wilson, Lindenwood Bell. There's some other programs.
That's another question we've gotten from another listener named John, who says, your patients mentioned Orton-Gillingham several times. Any comment on Lindenwood Bell? Nancy?
It's an Orton-Gillingham based. Orton-Gillingham is an approach, so there are several other things based on that gold standard. And so there are in fact many good things out there.
But the key is the multisensory.
But the key is all of this.
Explicit.
We've gotten an email from a listener who says, my son was diagnosed with central auditory processing disorder in second grade. His presentation of symptoms was identical to those being described as having dyslexia. Are we talking about the same condition, with dyslexia being an educational diagnosis and central auditory processing being more neurological in definition? He is graduating from high school next week and will be attending Purdue West Lafayette. He still has deficits in spelling and writing skills. He did have Orton-Gillingham tutoring for several years, starting in second grade. Is it the same thing?
I don't know specifically about her son. Some of our students do have auditory processing issues, so they can look very similar.
And it also depends on who did the assessments and what is their depth of understanding of the nuances of dyslexia.
We are talking about dyslexia here on No Limits. If you'd like to join the conversation, please give us a buzz at 866-476-3881. Mary, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my call, and thank you for this conversation. I just wanted to say that I'm a retired teacher of over 30 years, and for the first 28 years, I did not know what to do with students who came into my classroom and couldn't read, and so they left my classroom and couldn't read at the end of the year. So it was by God's grace that I was told by 3 different people that I needed to get myself to Butler University and take an Orton-Gillingham class. And when I did that and then instituted it in my classroom in 1998, it changed my life as a teacher, and it changed the lives of my students. I have since then begun to tutor individually and train teachers on a very low scale. But I wanted to thank your panelists for telling us about how to get teacher training. I also am concerned about people who, because I wasn't trained in the university to know what dyslexia is and how to remediate it, I'm wondering what's available. Are there any universities that are training pre-service teachers about dyslexia and how to remediate?
Good question. Thanks very much for the call and the question, Mary.
You're welcome.
Well, I'll throw that one to Nancy.
Through the International Dyslexia Association, they have developed a knowledge and practice standards that outlines what good literacy instruction looks like. And structured literacy with a multisensory approach is what is in that report. There are universities who do teach structured literacy. That is part of House Bill 1108 that passed a couple of years ago that says that our service centers may provide that training in structured literacy. So if schools are interested, reaching out to IDA, the Indiana IDA, would certainly be a good place to start, and then they could make arrangements with those 9 service centers in Indiana to provide teacher training as well.
We are talking about dyslexia. Catherine, welcome to the program.
Hi. I had, when I was younger, I had necrotizing fasciitis, and because of that, I have a brain disorder, and so I have short-term memory impairment. And when I was in school, a public school, they diagnosed me as dyslexic. However, that caused a lot of problems because it wasn't really dyslexic that was my issue. I had short-term memory. And so then I had a real hard time in public school, and it was this real miserable time. And then I switched to private school, and they introduced me to Orton Gillingham. And I feel like that just changed my whole life with schooling, and I was able to go to college, and I graduated from college. And just Orton Gillingham really just kind of saved my schooling. And I was wondering, how is it that I just feel like people in my school just really took off with it? How can we just integrate it into the public school system and help kids like me progress? Because I feel like it just totally transformed my schooling.
Thank you very much for the call and for sharing your story. Catherine, some of this, I presume, is a question of cost. How much does it cost to provide this kind of training or tutoring?
Right now, I'm feeling really thankful to the M.A. Rooney Foundation because they are at a very minimal cost because they are a not-for-profit or a foundation. I think that they charge for the manual, the training manual itself, for the teachers, but otherwise it's free. And they are right now training lots of teachers all over central Indiana right now. I think it's going to take parents and people to drive to say, this is what we want, this is what we need, and maybe perhaps some legislation.
But let's say, that the problem with legislation is even if, you put the idea in front of the legislature, that's not going to help us this coming school year. It will be at the soonest the school year after that, more likely a couple after that, because it takes some time to ramp up all of this. In the short term, if people wanted and had the means to get tutoring to intervene with their kids, how much could they expect that this is going to cost them?
Depends on where you go. It's right now, I think the going rate's $60 an hour twice a week. You really need 2 hours of tutoring. So
it's $120 a week and really somewhere north of $5,000 for the year.
That's very cost prohibitive.
For a lot of people. Yeah. For a lot of people.
So a lot of people, we refer to Scottish Rite, but they also have a waiting list.
And we also have a network of private individuals who we know are well trained, have been through a practicum experience, and tutor.
Rebecca, welcome to the program.
Hi.
Hi. What's on your mind?
Well, I am a person with dyslexia, and I'm 40 years old. We actually found it when I was in the 11th grade, and I made C's and D's most of my life until the 11th grade when I went to a fine arts center for music, and I wasn't getting the languages. And so my vocal teacher was like, I don't understand what's going on here. You should be doing this. So they had me tested in the 11th grade and found that I was dyslexic and several other disabilities, which I then in college went on to a college that had a disability program and taught me how to get over a lot of it, how to get around a lot of it, and how to just accept some of it. And in that program, it was really interesting because, I will never spell anything correctly. I will never be able to.
Joshua's chuckling. He feels your pain.
and I will never be the person who sits down and reads 50 novels in one day. I'm just not that person. But I am the person who is not disabled but has a difference. And I am the person who can stand there and say, I went and got my undergrad in music, and it took me, yes, another year and a half, but who cares? And yes, I went on to get my master's in divinity and ordained, and yes, it took me 2 more years, but who cares? And I am the person who stands up there every Sunday and any time that I have to preach and says these things and says, look, I'm not perfect. I can do these things, and this is who I am. And yes, someone's going to have to come behind me and check my spelling 1,000,000 times, but I still am a person who has a voice. And it's become kind of a mantra in my life. And it's been interesting to watch the people who don't necessarily have this difference, who come up behind and say, you know what, I'm just scared to get up and talk, but if you can do this, then I can do this. And so I'll be a liturgist, you know, and I don't know, it's these things that come up behind you and you end up standing in this difference and making a difference. And I know that it sounds kind of, you know, like you're, I don't know, but it's just one of those things that you have to accept about yourself.
Well,
and
Rebecca,
then not see it as a bad thing.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I think the most powerful thing I hear you saying here is the refrain, I am a person. I'm not defined by my challenges. I am a person. Thank you very much for calling and sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've also gotten an email that normally I would allow the last word, but we've been talking about costs. And Joshua, I think this is going to speak to you when I asked you that question about where you might be if it hadn't been caught. And I want to thank a listener named Clay for sending us this email because it is so powerful and it is so much on point. He says, I am a 54-year-old male. I was never diagnosed with dyslexia, mostly because growing up, it was an unknown condition. I was ridiculed for being lazy, got terrible grades, and barely graduated high school. It was not until I was almost 30 years old that I found out dyslexia is why letters jump around on the page, and things I read now won't say the same thing an hour from now. I went back to college 10 years ago, and after understanding and learning techniques for compensating for this condition, I graduated with a 4-year degree with a 3.9 GPA. But it took me decades to understand and get over all the harsh treatment given from parents, siblings, teachers, employers, etc., thinking I must not be as good as them. Thank you for your program. I hope it helps children so they don't have to live 40 years like I did. I can look at all of the looks on your faces and realize that's why we talked about this today, folks, so that we can avoid outcomes like that. Clay, I do want to thank you very much for sharing your story and writing this down. I'd also like to thank my guests, Nancy Perry and Cheryl Clemens, and, of course, Joshua Clemens, who also bravely shared his story with us. I am John Krull. You have been listening to No Limits. Thank you for joining us.
No Limits is a production of 90.1 WFYI Public Radio, Indianapolis. Executive producer, Michelle Johnson. Producer, Shannon Cagle. Interactive media coordinator, Scott McAllister. Technical producers, Cedric Freeman and Chris Flood. And board engineer, Joe Hatcher. Abby Terzini screens our calls. No Limits is made available through IPBS, Indiana's public broadcasting stations.
Hi, I'm Brandon Gossett.
I'm Brandon Meeks. I'm Richard Sleepy Floyd.
And I'm B. Young, and we're Native Son. Check out our small studio session at WFYI.